Chapter 10, Intelligence, Part 2B. I wasn't going to separate these, but thought I would do it in slightly smaller chunks. So this video is going to be looking at the nature of intelligence, the cognitive process approaches. So Part A, the psychometric approach, if you remember, that is concerned with mapping out the mind, measuring how people differ from one another. But what it doesn't explain is why people vary in these skills. So, cognitive approaches, process theories explore the specific information processing and cognitive processes that underlie intellectual ability. The main cognitive theory discussed in the text is Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence. This looks at both the psychological processes involved in intelligent behavior, and it divides the cognitive processes that underlie this behavior into three different parts. So you've got the meta components, the performance components, and the knowledge acquisition components, and we look more deeply at those in the next slide. And then those connect to the types of intellectual competence, which are separate competencies, as we'll talk about: analytical intelligence, practical intelligence, and creative intelligence. The three specific components, these are the three classes of, these are the cognitive processes that underlie each type of intelligence. So the meta components are the higher order processes used to plan and regulate task performance. So higher order processes to plan. So this involves problem solving skills, identifying problems, formulating hypotheses. It's the planning stage, right? So Sternberg believes that the meta components, it's the fundamental source of individual difference in fluid intelligence. So one of his assertions is that intelligence people, they spend a lot more time framing problems. They spend more time in this meta component stage, considering a problem before they dive in, right? Whereas people who do not, less intelligent people, will tend to dive right into the problem without planning this planning stage. Yeah. Performance components, those are the actual mental processes that the brain uses to perform the task. So they include perceptual processing, retrieving appropriate long-term memories and schemas, and generating responses. So this is just the processing of mental processes. And then finally, there's the knowledge acquisition components. This allows us to learn from our experiences. It stores information in memories, in our memory, and combines new insights with previously acquired information. So maybe it's better if we look up here. Figure 10.6 is on page 359 of your text. Okay, so there's the meta components: plan and regulate task behavior. The performance components: execute strategies specified by the meta components. So this is the mental processes. And then the knowledge acquisition components, this is where encode and store information, allows us to learn from our experience and such. These underlying cognitive processes, they are the underlying cognitive processes to the different types of intelligence. So Sternberg believed that there was more than one type of intelligence. He believes actually that there's at least three. One is analytical intelligence, which involves the kind of academically oriented problem-solving skills. There's practical intelligence, which refers to the skills needed to cope with everyday demands. So those are going to be different from culture to culture, or different demands on your lifestyle. And then creative intelligence comprises the mental skills needed to adapt to deal adaptively with novel problems, so things you have not come across in the past. Sternberg, so he believes that educational programs should teach all three of these skills, not just the analytical and the academic, which traditionally they have tend to do. He's done some research, and what they found is that curriculum that teaches the practical and the creative skills, in addition to the analytical, those children ended up with higher scores and greater mastery of course material than youth that learned only in the traditional method with the analytical skills. Up until now, we've talked about intelligence from the perspective of intelligence being a mental competence. But many psychologists think that this is far too limited, and that intelligence could be conceived in a much broader light. Okay, so they talk about two different types of intelligence in the textbook. One is Gardner's multiple intelligences, and then the other is emotional intelligence. So first we're going to look at Gardner's multiple intelligences, which I'm sure many of you have probably heard of before. So Gardner did a lot of his research with looking at people with brain damage. So where different damage in the brain, where it's located in the brain, and how that affects functioning. So now he currently has 8 distinct varieties. He calls them of adaptive abilities, and possibly going to have a 9th. The 8 we're going to look at on the next slide. The 9th is not on there, but it's existential intelligence, which is a philosophically oriented ability to ponder questions about the meaning of one's existence, life, and death. So that has not yet made the chart, but it is possibly in the making. So here we have the 8 intelligences that Gardner has outlined. There is linguistic intelligence, use language well, as a writer would. Logical mathematical intelligence, reason mathematically and logically. Visuospatial intelligence was the ability to solve spatial problems or to succeed in the field. In a field like architecture, whatnot. Musical intelligence, ability to perceive pitch and rhythm and to understand and produce music. Bodily kinesthetic intelligence, control body movements and skillfully manipulate objects, as demonstrated by higher order skilled dancers, athletes, surgeons. Interpersonal, understand and relate well to others. Intrapersonal, understand oneself, which is somewhat like the 9th. And naturalistic intelligence, detect and understand phenomena in the natural world, such as a zoologist or a meteorologist might. So supporters of Gardner's multiple intelligence might point to, say, athletes, like ridiculously skilled athletes that, just seem to be naturally gifted at a particular sport, right, as a sign of the bodily kinesthetic intelligence. Or musicians like Mozart and, the newer people who just seem to be naturally gifted at creating music. So you can find examples for each of these. The first 3, linguistic, logical, mathematical, and visual spatial, those are actually measured by existing intelligence tests, but the others are not, like musical, bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, and naturalistic. Those are not currently measured in intelligence tests. Those are often considered more talents than anything else. including these as intelligences, it's sort of controversial because it does go way beyond like the traditional conception of what intelligence is, like as a mental skill, mental skills and mental abilities. The second form of intelligence that's outside of the traditional mental ability realm is emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence that involves people's like the ability to read people's emotions accurately, respond to them appropriately, the ability to motivate yourself and to be aware of one's own emotions, self-awareness, and to regulate and control one's own emotional responses. And we're going to look at those on the next slide. I just wanted to mention, because it points out here, the method of testing these emotions is indicated in the text. It's the, oh geez, I'm going to try to say this, the Marcellovi-Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test. Okay, so there's 4 branches to emotional intelligence. They have specific tasks that they use to measure each of these branches, and then what they come up with a score. You get a score on each of your branch, and then you get a total overall score. Okay, so here's the 4 branches of emotion detection and control abilities. So branch 1 has to do with perceiving emotions. Branch 2 is using emotions to facilitate thought. Branch 3 is understanding emotions. And branch 4 is managing emotions. So on page 361, it goes into detail about the tests that they use for each. You can just review those and just understand that they do give a score for each of those based on your performance on these tests. So proponents of the emotional intelligence point to the important adaptive advantages of emotional skills. So they're saying emotional intelligence is not outside the realm. It is very important in an adaptive way, and it has in your ability to read other people's emotions, to respond successfully, to respond in a successful way, to read what they're thinking and manage your own emotions, has its roots in evolution. So emotionally intelligent people, they have stronger bonds with others, they have stronger social success, they have more success in careers, marriage, child rearing. They have less occurrences of depression, anxiety, whatnot. And then there's a few examples of research that is supposedly supports the idea of emotional intelligence here. But what it also points out is that there's not a lot of research support for this, right? So they have all of these claims, but it has not been rigorously tested that a link between the cause effect link between emotional intelligence and, for example, success in the workplace or greater life satisfaction. So what the critics sort of would like to see is that it not be called emotional intelligence. It's not without its value, but it's not a form of intelligence. They're arguing. They're saying more of it's a skill, right? So they prefer it called emotional competence to distinguish it from intelligence. In this last slide, we've just actually discussed this. Distinguishing it from the concept of traditional mental skills concept of intelligence. And it does have its advantages, like I said, but it's just not heavily research. There's not a lot of research supporting it. Okay, so that is the end of part 2. The first part was the psychometric in the previous video. This one we talked about the cognitive process approaches, and then a couple of the broader conceptions when they start looking at emotional intelligence and that sort of thing. So the next pieces of parts of the chapter get into the measurement of intelligence, hereditary environment and intelligence, group differences, and extremes of intelligence. Don't forget, chapter readings are always there to help you out, and to practice answering questions in the way that they are asked on the test.